Okay, welcome to Well Published Live. I'm your host, Aimee Lou, and I'm speaking today with author Karen Shepard about her epistolary essay in the Paris Review and much, much more. This essay is distilled from correspondence between Karen, her Chinese mother, and her Chinese-Belgian grandmother, the famous author Han Suyin. Karen's writing often reflects her mixed-race family, so this conversation also honors Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Welcome, Karen. So great
Thank
to
you
have
so
you.
much for having me, Aimee.
To introduce you, um, tell me if I'm getting any of this wrong. You were raised in New York City. You're the author of 4 novels, An Empire of Women, The Bad Boy's Wife, Don't I Know You?, The Celestials, and more recently, the story collection Kiss Me Someone. You teach writing and literature at Williams College, as did your husband, novelist Jim Shepard, until fairly recently, right?
Yes,
He's just retired, I
he's
guess?
just retired.
Oh my
Yeah,
God,
living
that
the good
dreaded
life.
word. We first met in Siren Land. I've been there twice. I think we met the first time in 2015 in Positano, Italy. For anybody who's watching, Siren Land is an incredible writers' conference. It happens at the end of March-ish every year, and it was started by Danny Shapiro and Michael Marin. But I never got the story of how you and Jim got involved, because you're part of the foursome that's always there, right?
We weren't there from the very beginning. I think we started coming maybe the third year. Hannah Tinty, who's one of the organizers, who's a writer herself and who started the magazine One Story, she knew Jim and me, and she put us together with Danny and Michael. And Jacob, Danny and Michael's son, was about the same age as one of our children. We have 3. And so there was a little posse of children for a little while who got along very well. And I think that made it a kind of harmonious fit. And we're so happy that Hannah introduced us, because Danny and Michael are such good friends now. And that conference is a very, very special place, as you know, for students and faculty, and there's very little hierarchy between them, I think, which makes it stand out amongst some writing conferences.
Yeah. It's great. I mean, this is sort of a sideline question, but it is a question that I wonder about how important writers' conferences are for people. Obviously, Sirenland is pretty pricey. There are
Very.
other writers' conferences that are much less expensive, but I've I think it's great because if you can go to different ones, you can study with different types of teachers, and maybe it's a good thing, but are you any general thoughts on the value of writers'
No, I think
conferences?
that's one of the biggest values of it. Exposing yourself to different kinds of feedback from professional writers, and not just your teachers, but your peers in the class. Um, I think one of the main advantages is often what I tell my undergrads, that one of the main advantages of getting an MFA is, which is that you're spending time with people who don't question in any way what you hope to do with writing and what you value about reading and writing. And so there is something to be said for a community of people in a field that is mostly isolationist, so yeah, and solitary. So
Yeah.
I think if you can combat that solitariness with some sense that there's a world of people out there who value what you're valuing. I don't mean the kind of writing that you value, but just that one would want to devote significant time and space to these questions and this attempt, I think can be really buoying. I mean,
Yeah.
especially when you do it alone for
Yeah.
most of your time. And I think out of those conferences, I know this has been true at Sirenland, and I used to teach at the Tin House Conference a lot. You meet your people, and then they become your people in real life. And I just know so many students who have connected with other people and have stayed reading partners with them and gone to other conferences with them and blurbed each other's books and all of that. So I think they're very valuable. I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, I think all of that is true of an MFA program in my experience as well. But if you can't, or, if that's off the table, then I think writing conferences are a very good kind of substitute. Um,
Completely.
yeah. So let's get on to the main order of business here. This
Oh, yeah.
incredible epistolary essay you've written for the Paris Review. I want to get to the title later, but it is called "The World is an Easier Place Without You in It." Okay, so let's start with the family history recap. Um, it's such a complicated family you've got. Your grandmother, Han Su-yin, was incredibly famous as a doctor and a communist sympathizer in China and a novelist. And her novel, A Many Splendid Thing, was made into a movie in 1955 that some might recognize. Love is a Many Splendid Thing. Your mother was Chinese, and Han Su-yin adopted her in, I think, 1942, you said. So right in the middle
Yep.
of the war in China,
Yep.
the war everywhere. And she was also brilliant from what I gather from your writing. And your father was the Jewish film producer Sidney Glazer, who worked with Mel Brooks on The Producers and The 12 Chairs. And I mean, it's an incredible family. How, with so much material, how do you find the spine of the story? I mean, there are two I want to talk about sort of in general,
Hmm.
this one in particular, but also a piece you did some years ago called Dragon Ladies, which is another amazing essay. But how do you winnow through what you're going to write about with all of this?
I mean, who knows? From being a writer, you're just, down on your knees, thankful that you have anything you want to write about that you care
Yeah.
enough to do. Um, yeah, I mean, I think in the case of the newest essay, the Paris Review essay, my mom had died by assisted death in Switzerland, and I I knew prior to her death that I wanted her papers. She had a lot of them, and she had saved letters, and she had saved childhood stuff, and she had saved my letters to her and her mother's letters to her. And then she had salvaged her own letters to her mother from my grandmother's apartment before she died. So in many cases, she had the closed loop of letters, of correspondence. Um, so I didn't take notes during the whole process of my mother's aging and last months of life and going to Switzerland. And people kept saying to me, "Are you taking notes?" And I kept saying, "Nope, just going to try to live through this because this is really hard. And then we'll see what happens." So it was when I was going through all the papers that I had from her and made some discoveries that I hadn't known would be in there, that the form of the essay and just the desire to write the essay came about. Um, and it also came about because um, the the correspondence I had with the clinic in Switzerland, they assign you a kind of caseworker, the clinic that you go to for assisted death, and he followed up after my mom died to ask me how I was doing. And so there was an email that I wrote to him, and that articulated some of what I was feeling. And so I think I took that email and sort of thought, how could I tell this story in a fuller way? How could I take this email and sort of accordion it out? Like, what do I mean when I say the world is an easier place without her in it? In what ways is it easier? And he asked me questions like, did she know that she was a difficult person? Things like that. So I think the prompting of his and my correspondence was sort of the spine. And then to tell the story of her death, I also had to tell the story, at least in part, about our relationship and how unprecedented the kind of connection we had at the end of her life was for us. So that sort of determined that I needed to do some past stuff You really can't talk about what kind of mother she was. I mean, there's a lot of generational trauma, so you can't talk about what kind of mom she was without talking about what kind of mom my grandma was. Um, so there was that. Um, I did leave a lot of stuff out. I mean, I don't talk about my father at almost at all in the piece. Um, and that's a decision I think you make as a nonfiction writer, right? You're not trying to tell the whole story. You're
Yeah.
trying to explore what you don't know about some aspect of the story, it seems to me.
Yeah, I think it's, one of the hardest things. I mean, when I was getting my MFA in at Bennington, I worked with Sven Berkertz, and he would always write more in the margins,
Yeah,
open it up more, which
yeah,
is kind of, and I started to think about it as like an accordion where you unpack and then you have to pack, and you
yeah,
unpack and you have to pack, so that I can imagine the issue of your father was something like you would put it in and you would take it out, and you would put it in and you would take it out until you had just a tiny enough about, to cover the base a little bit, so there
yeah,
weren't huge questions, but it is one of the hardest things, especially in memoir, writing about such a big story
yeah.
as your family. Um, so, did you have a process for selecting the individual pieces and for trimming them down? Or,
Um, So I think as in researching any project, so for example, the novel The Celestials was heavily researched about a group of Chinese factory workers in North Adam. Oh, that's so
there it is.
nice. I don't
There it
even have
is.
a copy here, I don't think. Um, um, and I think you cast a wide net, and then when you discover the things that are emotionally resonant, even if you don't know why they're emotionally resonant, you get a little sensation, and the more you do it, I think the better you get at having that antenna out. And so there are whole slews of things that I looked at in these file cabinets of stuff I have of hers that didn't give me that little frisson. But when they did, I would put them over here, right, in a pile. And I, of course, didn't use all of those. But the original essay was much longer, and then when I got in the editorial relationship with the Paris Review, there was a lot of back and forth about cutting, and, um, if I end up completing the book that I'm working on, I'll use the longer essay as the opening. But I think you're trying to sort of teach yourself as you go, right? So you're trying to figure out, why does this need to be in here? Right. And you are trying to figure out what the emotional fraughtness of it is. Um, so for example, at first I wasn't including emails from her or letters from her that seemed quite psychologically astute because I wanted portrait of her where she was not very astute. And then at some point you have to go, well, Karen, what are you protecting yourself from by protecting yourself from saying, no, she was actually quite emotionally capable sometimes,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, so usually I think, I mean, at least in my experience with writing nonfiction, usually you're trying to protect yourself in some way from being responsible for the situation in which you find yourself. And so part of my process when I'm looking at the primary documents is, all right, which of these forces me to see something that I would prefer not to have to see? And that tends to get put in.
Yeah, yeah, that was, working with Jim at Sirenland, that business of protecting the protagonist and, the narrator's complicity
Yeah.
were really important wake-up calls.
No, I think in memoir, it's in fact a bigger, potential pitfall than in a lot of fiction. I mean, I
Yeah.
I think, um, I think the stakes just increase for writers when they're writing real stuff, right? And so, that desire that we all have as writers, whether we're writing fiction or nonfiction, to both explore the things that matter most and protect ourselves from the things that matter most, um, is maybe higher in memoir. At least that's been my experience.
I think so, and partly it's because most of us are not all that self-aware. We think we are, but we're not. I mean, I have this is on a tangent a little bit, but it's interesting because you describe your grandmother as being very narcissistic. In my experience, narcissists make kind of tend to make the worst writers because they lie to themselves all the time about who they are and what's reality and what's
Oh,
true.
my
Um,
grandmother had multiple volumes of these memoirs that, were sort of hit Chinese histories and the story of her life. And my mother never knew what her actual adoption story was, because in one book it's one thing, and then she was told several other things in real life, and then grandma would say different things in interviews. So she was absolutely someone who registered that facts were not hard truths, um,
yeah,
and that were utterly malleable. No, I think that's true. But narcissists are often really lovely, characters to have because
yeah,
they're quite dynamic
yeah,
usually. Yeah.
yeah, oh, yeah, absolutely. Um, the other In addition to selecting these pieces, then the other thing that I found fascinating about this essay, which was also I asked you before we started if you'd read The Correspondent, because there are aspects of the organization of The Correspondent that are very similar to the way you organize this essay, which is that you use the frame of your mother's desire to go to Switzerland and have this what's called voluntary assisted dying. So the correspondence begins with her request for that, and then the piece ends a little bit after she's died. But in the middle, you go back and forth. You kind of take these wild swings away back in time to your birth, her adoption, and then one, as we were saying, exquisite piece with the story that your mother wrote at age 7, which just completely broke my heart. It was such a beautiful piece of writing, and to think that she had done that at age 7 was just mind-boggling. But how did you figure out that structure and that organizational patterning?
So I had we're heading to Switzerland structural organization spine, right? And I was trying to give the reader a small mirror experience of what my living of that spine had been like. So, my mother took a fall in January. She lived in New York on her own, where I had grown up, and I just happened to be visiting her from my home in Massachusetts and found her. Um, and so there was that weird coincidence, right? Like, if I hadn't been coming to New York that day, she would not have been found. And so she's hospitalized and then goes to rehab. And in that time, the idea of going to Switzerland, which had come up over a few years prior to that, became more of a priority for her. And that's what she decided. And so we were pursuing applying for that, but I also didn't know whether she might change her mind. So we were also pursuing how would she go home if she didn't go to Switzerland. And so I had that spine, but attached to the living of it, it's not just me at 60 going in to see her, right? It's me at 4 going in to see her, and the 60-year-old trying to get the 4-year-old out of the way so we can have a grown-up interaction as opposed to a needy child interaction or a needy mother interaction. And so I wanted the reader to know what that arc was like, and you had to know something about what things had been for her and for me, separately and together, in order to understand what the stakes of things going wrong post her fall might have been. I mean, if she had fallen 3 years before she fell, maybe even 2. We were not speaking at the time, and so I wouldn't have been at her apartment, and if someone had called me, I don't know how involved I would have been with her. So there was something that was coming together in a kind of perfect storm of things that allowed her to voice what she needed and wanted. So to ask what she needed. She was not good at asking for help in general. And for me to be in a position to want to give that to her. And that was not always the case with us. So part of the structure was, how can I give the reader a sense of who the two people were who were coming together post-January and spending those last few months together in a way that in many ways was unprecedented. So
Yeah.
I needed to bring the past in. But my kind of, and I probably get this from Jim too. You might remember this from his workshop. How much context do you need to give people? It's a kind of need to know basis. Like, what do you need to know from the past to understand the moment we're in right now? I don't need to tell you everything, right? I need to tell you enough. I often say to my students, it's like I'm pulling you into a car saying, hey, we're going to this party and I really want you to meet Aimee. Here's what you need to know about Aimee before you meet her, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to give them your bio,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to say she hates it when she doesn't suffer fools easily. So don't be an idiot in front of her or whatever, right? So that's kind of how the guideline I use, I think, for all my writing, probably.
Yeah, I think it's a good one. It's still very difficult to chip away the excess because, especially if you know somebody well, you may think something is absolutely vital for everybody to know, and you have to take a step outside of yourself to say, well, is it really? That's that hard thing to do. The ending on this, based on everything that you just said, is just devastating. The typed unsent letter you find in her files, which ironically is something that Virginia Evans also does in the correspondence. She
So
has an
funny.
unsent thing, but it's your mother's words about wanting to connect with you. It is so heartbreaking. She asked, what did I do with you that you didn't like? What did I do that you didn't understand and would like to know? What would you have liked me to do that I didn't do? You know, would you like to help me in my time? Would you like me to help you in your anguish? I mean, oh my God, it's just so heartbreaking that this was never sent.
Yeah.
And I,
I mean, yeah, that letter was really stunning to find. And I have no idea when it was written. So I have no idea when she was feeling the need to write that or potentially send it. But the information in it was not, I knew she felt all those things.
mm,
Um, but she had such a hard time saying that, communicating that,
mm,
and such a hard time admitting that she had in any way been responsible for my anguish. And so it felt a little like a gift from beyond and from the future and the past. Like it just it was heartbreaking for a lot of reasons. One, her own need that was so beautifully articulated in it. The emotional astuteness that the letter indicates was really beautiful and bittersweet because she
mhm.
wasn't always so good at that. Um, I mean, I think there was nobody more important to her than I was. I'm her only child, was her only child. Um, and I think she couldn't get out of her own prison to get what she wanted from this relationship. And it's very, very sad to think that it might have been different. Um, I've sort of come to the conclusion, maybe even post writing the essay, that it could not have been that different. I don't, maybe, but I spent a lot of my adult life figuring out different ways to be and say and do so that she could respond differently. And I think she was capable of that kind of connection with other people, but she was not capable of it with me. I think that I was structurally terrifying to her. And so she couldn't get out of her own way. But the letter, I'm really glad I have that letter. It's a heartbreaking gift, but it's a gift nonetheless.
But she also says that she didn't have any friends that she could talk to, that she could reveal. I mean, that's part of what's so heartbreaking as well. I mean, it wasn't just you. She had no one. She was just so isolated. And the pictures are absolutely gorgeous. I mean, look at that photograph.
I know.
Oh my God. It's so, so beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, she was so beautiful. The love in that picture is so intense.
Yeah.
Of course, that's part of the problem. You went away. You didn't stay there. Yeah.
Yes, I became a sentient being, which she was
Yeah.
acutely aware I would do. And so
Right.
part of her was like, you're going to leave me, so I better not be connected to you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Which gets us to the general topic of writing about difficult mothers. Before we go on, though, tell me, obviously, the line, "The world is an easier place without you in it," is in one of the messages. But when did you decide that that was the title of this piece? Because it's rough.
It's so funny um, that you say that. I was talking to another friend who has a difficult father um, who is still alive, and one of her friends calls her up, and whenever she calls her up, she says, "Is he dead yet?" So I said, "There's the title of your essay." um,
Right.
much rougher than mine.
Yeah.
I think it was after I reread the email that I had written to the man from the clinic, the sort of caseworker, um, and when he asked me how I was doing, and I really have not had another death like this in my life where there's so much front loading when you know when the death is going to happen that that's even different than people who I've known who've died of illness where you know they're dying but you don't know exactly when. um, that I did not feel torn apart afterwards in the way that I have with some other losses. And so it did strike me that my lived experience since her death had been, it is easier to be in the world without her here. I mean,
Mm.
there, even when we weren't talking, that's a big presence. To not be talking to your mother is a big presence. And then when talking to your mother is a potential minefield from both of you, if you get into the dynamic where you're throwing bombs at each other, that that's just exhausting. Your cortisol is always right here, right? And so there was a way in which what I was most grieving was the hope I'd had that things would change and shift. But when she's gone, you don't have that hope anymore. It's like, oh, I'm not going to get the mom that I would have, as Annie Lamott said, that I would have picked out at the mommy store. You know, um, I got the mom I got, and I'm sad and angry about that, and also grateful. Um, but boy, it's easier to be in a world without her where that 4-year-old inside of me doesn't have that continued hope. And it just feels easier. I have to say, the ease started to happen once for her, and then by ripple effect for me, once she decided to go to Switzerland, because
Mm.
she became easier in the world knowing that she was going to be in control of the way she left it.
Mm.
So it
Yeah.
was easier to be her daughter after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you should not imagine that it was like an after-school special in Switzerland.
Yes.
I mean, she was herself until the end and said quite mean things to me over that last weekend, but there was a lot more connection than there might have been.
Yeah, yeah. I had a, equally difficult relationship with my mother, and, I can certainly relate to this in many respects. My only regret with my mother is that I wasn't with her at the end, and I would have. That's the thing that haunts me, not
Yeah.
anything else. I mean, I long since given up the idea that we were gonna have any kind of, real relationship where we could confide in each other about anything that was honestly true. But I did feel very badly that I wasn't with her at the end, and
Because that would have fed you, or because you feel
I
like that's what a good daughter does?
I think it
Or
would
both?
have fed me. I was with my I had a niece who died at 36. I was with her in her final moments. I was with my father in his final moments and days, and both of them, I think, actually literally waited for me to come into the room because they both died about 20 minutes after I arrived. Um, so I know the grace that you get, the sense of this is a really important moment in your own life and in your relationship, and that sense of grace is just extraordinary, and I wanted to have that with my mother because I did think that that would be a healing it would help heal the relationship of an entire lifetime, and so I do feel that without that final moment together, there is something that's left broken or left
Mhm,
wounded that maybe didn't quite need to be.
mhm,
So, fortunately, some other members of my family were with her in the last,
mhm.
24, 48 hours. So, it's not the feeling that she was alone or abandoned, but,
Right.
um,
No, I think that grace is exactly the right word. I think there's something lovely about I was there when my dad died too, and, I there's something I'm very grateful for, to have kept them company. Um,
mhm,
and I don't know that I feel like it mended everything, but I feel like it was a good in and of itself, whether or not it mended things. And I think, f for them who were acutely aware of their limitations as parents, there, I think, was some comfort that their child was there.
mhm.
But I would not have done it, um, because that's what a good daughter should do.
No.
I
Yeah.
don't I one of the things that really helped me as towards the end of her life was a book that somebody suggested I read. It has a not very good title, but it's about caring for or overseeing the death of, difficult or abusive parents. And,
Uh,
one of the points the writer makes is, that argument that this is what a good child does, that you owe them because they housed you or fed you or whatever, or brought you into the world, doesn't hold because they already broke the contract. So you get to decide. Doesn't mean you shouldn't be with them, but you get to decide whether you're gonna be there or not, and it's unfair of people to say to you, "Well, of course you have to go be with your dad or your mom because they're your dad and mom."
mm.
And that was really useful for me, like, why am I at this rehab place? Why am I organizing Switzerland for her, Do I wanna do that because that's what I wanna do, kinda thing.
You've stated, I love this quote, your novels could all be categorized as close psychological studies. One friend says they could all have been called the bad mother's daughters. Uh, this issue of ambivalence and complicity and the ruthless interrogation of yourself. I've got to ask because for me, this is the most difficult aspect of writing family memoirs is identifying my own complicity and role in it and what it actually means to me. I mean, I have a fascination with my Chinese ancestry or my Chinese, you know, grandfather and my father's early life. And it's so easy to get lost in being fascinated by them. The hardest thing for me is to bring it back to me and say, what has this got to do with me? Why do I care?
Mhm.
Um, do you begin with that self interrogation or does it surface as you write about others? Or how do you bring yourself into these stories? This one is obviously it's a one-on-one story, so you're right there. But when you write
I
about your grandmother, for example.
I mean, I think when I think about the nonfiction that I admire the most, no matter what somebody is writing about, it could be their mother or it could be the teapot they had when they were 20, right? It seems to me that those writers that understand in a very self-conscious way that they are examining that thing for what it reveals about themselves and their relationship to the world and to the other people in the world. That's the writing that I admire the most. The writing I admire the least when it comes to memoir is what I might call like well-meaning people, sort of, well, Jim calls it obstacles overcome narratives,
Mhm.
well-meaning people that the world throws difficult things at that you do your best with. Um, so for me, if I'm going to examine the world with the kind of rigor that I think good literature demands, right? I mean, the expansion of our empathies has to begin with great observation. What do I
Mhm.
see in this world? Um, then if I'm going to do that with the world, I better do it with myself, or else it's just some kind of poor me or revenge fantasy or see I told you, or whatever. It also doesn't then put the writer in the position, unless you do that, it doesn't put the writer in the position of, um, learning something they didn't know before going into the project, right? So, I am writing, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, to discover,
Mhm.
something new about myself, not in an epiphanic way necessarily, but just in a I come out slightly different than I went in. I want that as a reader when I read books, and I want that as a writer when I create them. And so I think to do that, you have to ask yourself, and you have to ask yourself how you are responsible for the situations that you are unhappy with, in part,
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
completely. I would also stress that I see a difference between blame and responsibility. Um, Blame is accusatory and filled with shame, and you even you think of the gesture. The recipient of blame can only do this, right? If I say take responsibility, I'm actually asking you to be an agent. I'm asking you to there's a great Amy Hempel story, Afterlife, where one character says to the teenage girl protagonist, "Take up space. Like, just walk in the sidewalk in a way that takes up space." So if I say to you, take responsibility, I am saying you're worthy of taking up space. You're worthy of being an agent in your own life. So to me, it's taking responsibility is inviting somebody to step in and to be an agent of behavior, of change if you want to change, or of not change if you don't want to change. And that's where genuine power comes from. So I think that one of the things I find myself complicitous about over and over as I write is I learned very early how to turn a certain kind of low level victimization into power. I think children with parents like mine learned that. And um, I wanna step away from that source of power as I know more about the world and myself and my place in it. That doesn't seem a sustainable way to be genuinely powerful. I think when I was 4, it was really useful. You get power where you can get it when you can't walk away from the
Mhm.
situation that you have.
Mhm.
But as you get older, I think I can hold you responsible for, and hold myself responsible for that. So I guess I would say, to circle back to sort of directly answering your question, it's always like this, right? It's always what I'm talking about the world, how I meet the world, what I bring to the table, what the world brings to the table, and how we intersect in that way.
Interesting. So you're always in it. You're always in the story,
I mean,
one
emotionally,
way
if
or
not,
yeah,
it's not necessarily that everything I write is autobiographical in an experiential
right.
way, but certainly the things I choose to write about are because they overlap with emotional, obsessions, right? And so that's my autobiography. That's my emotional autobiography. So, I mean, if Jim Shepard is writing about the creature from the Black Lagoon, some part of that creature is Jim Shepard, right?
Right. Madame Bovary, c'est moi. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's easy for a lot of people to forget or neglect that, I think.
Well, and we're so trained as readers to conflate the author with the narrator. We're titillated by that sense, and many authors use that, tendency on our part as a tool, right? You think about somebody like Aimee Hempel or Laurie Moore or Tim O'Brien, any number of people, right, who are going to say, all right, if you're going to perform that conflation, if you're going to make assumptions about autobiography, I'm going to use that to get you to be moved, to get you surprised, to take you unexpected places, and I'm all for that, right? But the idea that if you say, I write sci-fi and therefore I'm not writing autobiographically, I'm like, yeah, you are,
Yeah, sure,
yeah.
sure. So part of this is you're mixed race. I'm mixed race, and that's an unusual perspective, or has been until fairly recently in this world. However, you grew up under the shadow of one of the most famous mixed race writers, of her generation, Han Suyin, who I actually didn't, until I started reading your work, I didn't realize that she was Chinese and Belgian. I thought she was Chinese because she's so enmeshed with the history of modern China.
Yeah.
Were you aware of that kind of mixed race perspective or coloration of her work, or as you became a writer, did it factor into your sense of yourself as a writer?
Oh, completely. I mean, you couldn't be around grandma without being unaware that she was mixed race. It was uh, deeply identity forming for her, in a very different way than it was for me. But so the issue or the field of being mixed race was on the table from the time I was born,
Wow.
and grandma was very aware that I was the closest thing
Mm.
to her in the family. And so, um, but she grew up the child of a Chinese father and a Belgian mother, which is the gender split that's much rarer,
Yeah, it's
especially at
like
the
mine.
time.
My grandparents were the same. Yeah.
Yes, and that's rarer, especially at your grandparents' time or my grandmother's parents' time. Um, my mother is Chinese, my dad is a Jew, that's almost like just a dime a dozen, right? Especially in New York. So, and especially when I grew up in the 60s and 70s. So there was a very different stance. The I occupied a different space in the world as a mixed race person in New York in the 60s and 70s than my grandmother did. I mean,
Mhm.
she suffered a great deal by being mixed race, both from the Chinese world and the European world. And so she embraced, I'm sure, I mean, I don't know that I've ever talked to her about this, but part of why she became so enmeshed in China, I think, was to have one identity.
Mhm.
It's not an accident that she gave up her given name, which was Elizabeth, to be a pen name, Han Suyin, which was a name she became mostly known by. I mean, her intimates called her Elizabeth, but most people called her Suyin. So um,
Hmm.
for me, um, and there's a lot of factors in this. There's when I grew up, there's where I grew up, there was the attitude my parents had towards being mixed race, there was the attitude my family had towards it. Um, I felt quite powerful being mixed race. I felt like I had a foot in both worlds in a kind of very stable stance. Like my legs were sort of my feet were hip distance apart,
Mm.
and um, I felt stable as a result of it. And that's partially because culturally, I'm very Western. I mean, I don't speak Chinese. My mom didn't speak Chinese growing up. I mean, to me, she didn't speak Chinese. Um, I've only visited China. I've never lived there. I've studied it a lot, but that's very different. On the other hand, and my mom was raised very Westernly also, but on the other hand, she was Asian, and so in many ways she was an Asian mom, and so I whatever that means, right? There's all different kinds of Asian moms, but so I felt like I had a slightly outsider view of both worlds, which, if you're a writer, is a pretty advantageous view to have. I mean, I think most writers feel on some level that they are outsiders of some kind, even
100%.
when they come from very privileged backgrounds, right? And so um, I- it gave me a little bit of distance on my worlds that I found enormously helpful and and emotionally powerful.
Yeah, you wrote here in Dragon Ladies, my grandmother and I were recognizable to ourselves. Our lifelong insistence on controlling our own narratives, ignoring what didn't fit, had protected us from anyone's versions but our own, which I find fascinating because as a mixed race person, and I think my father too, pretty much the opposite of, other people were always controlling our narratives when we're and pushing us in one direction or another. I don't know whether Katie G. Salisbury's on the call, but she's writing a book about the history of
Mm,
mixed race people in America right now. And she just did a fantastic Substack the other day about all the mixed race celebrities that there are now, and they're
yeah,
banding together to do all this, diversity within the mix,
yeah,
as opposed to what's called Wasian or Blasian, where
yeah.
they're just trying to say white Asian or black Asian as if there were only two. She's here. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Katie.
But I think that's fascinating because when I was growing up in, suburban Connecticut, my brother and I were N of one, we had nobody else. And you're saying that growing up in New York City made you, and I was always drawn to New York City, partly because when I went in there, I didn't feel like I was,
Weird.
the odd person out
Yeah,
or
yeah.
weird. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think my grandmother did not control her narratives as a child, right? I mean, I think there were many doctors when she was an infant who wouldn't touch the yellowish baby, that kind of thing. I mean, terrible narratives placed on her. But I think her solution to that was to embrace a kind of ability to tell her own story in a multiplicity of ways, right? It's not an accident that she is mixed race and ended up, giving my mom 5 different versions of the adoption story, right? Um, it, there's there's a way in which the narratives that are put on you help determine how you become a storyteller yourself, right? You're going to either bow under that, right, and become what the world tells you you are, or you're going to push back a little, right? And I was lucky in that I didn't have a world that was giving me all that many negative stories, which isn't to say that, I didn't feel weird on occasion, but I didn't feel weird enough where I felt like my knees were cut out from me.
Yeah.
I mean, again, as I say that, I'm thinking of a million times where I felt super weird, but or an odd person out. But I think it's okay to feel like an odd person out. I don't know. I in middle school, it's terrible because all you want to do is be the same as everybody who's around you. But in general, I don't know. I think it's pretty good to be the exception, not the rule. And I also think even when it's horrible, it's useful. I
Yeah.
mean, it's useful practice that something can feel bad without being the end of the world, I guess. I think it gave me practice with that.
It's also, I think, in a funny way, it's helpful to have something that's an objective reality that explains why you feel different. As
Right,
you said
right.
before, I mean, most writers feel different, and a lot of them they can't point to any particular reason why they feel different. They just feel different, and
Yeah.
so then their writing is all that. So if I look back, everything that I've ever written has been actually about this kind of quest for understanding identity and making sense of these different vectors that have come in to form me and tugged in one direction or tugged in the other. And where I am in the middle of that tug of war has always been the
Yeah.
thing which has been useful for my writing.
But also, what writer can't say that, right? I
Yeah,
mean, that's what we do as writers. We're trying to figure out, um, who we are when we step out of what we know ourselves to be,
right.
right?
Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit here and talk about getting published in the Paris Review, which is, one of the things that made me want to talk to you today was that's sort of like the creme de la creme of a literary
I
magazine
totally agree.
publication.
Yeah.
And how do you? Yeah, I mean, I've been told that the only way you can get into the Paris Review is if your agent sends your work and blah 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 blah. And is that what what was your trajectory to getting there? How did it happen?
That's exactly what happened. So, um, I've never been in the Paris Review before. It's a place I've always wanted to be, so this has been very gratifying. I sent the essay to my agent, and he has a guy in the agency who handles all the shorter work, the non-book length work, and that guy sent it to uh, the Paris Review, who took it almost right away. And I think because they were so enthusiastic, then he was like, "Oh, well, let's try these other places." And so they tried the New Yorker and they tried Harper's, maybe. And the New Yorker said it was too complicated to follow. Um, um, and whenever you get a rejection, basically, Jim and I say this all the time, is you're basically just getting told, well, we didn't like it enough for whatever reason. And it doesn't really matter what reason. It's just, we didn't like it enough. So, and then I worked with two different editors at the Paris Review because one of them was just leaving to go back to her own writing after the first part of things. And there was a lot of back and forth. I mean, I was laughing. The Paris Review's fact checking is I'm reading all these mainstream media news stories that are insanely wrong, and I'm going, well, if only they had the Paris Review fact checkers, who are fact checking my little essay better than
Mm.
the Times is having their pieces fact checked. So there was a lot of back and forth about they wanted to see, I had excerpted some of the documents, like not put in the whole, they wanted to see the original. I had to send them all the original sources in full. They wanted to make sure that I hadn't changed the meaning of things by cutting or, cutting and pasting. And I saw it as a collage more than a linear document, right? Than a full
Mhm.
document. And so but their edits were super useful, partially because they don't know me,
Mhm.
and don't know my family. So when it was like, well, this is confusing or whatever, then I could address that and believe it. I think I'm probably a difficult writer to edit because I think if you live with a writer and you share work, as Jim and I do, it's been so edited before I send it out. And I'm also just a mistrusting person to begin with. So I'm kind of like, I'm like, make your case. And I want you to make your case. If you make it, I'll totally listen to you. But if you're not good at making your case, I'm kind of like, no, you know? Um, so I tried to be more flexible than that. But I'm thrilled to be in their pages. It's, yeah, as magazines die all around us, it's really, really lovely to have something like the Paris Review still around.
Yeah. You said they cut it way down or it was cut. So did they suggest specific cuts or
Yeah.
did they give you? Oh, they did. They really line edited it.
Um, Yeah, I mean, the cuts were bigger blocks than that. So one aspect of the essay that's still there is not just my letters with mom and hers with grandma, but with my current family, my husband and three
Mhm.
kids, like
Mm.
text threads with them from Switzerland or voice memos or that kind of thing. And there was more of that in the original. Um, Largely because I was, wanting the reader to have a sense, again, of who was going through this experience with my mom was somebody who had made this other family. And, the those of you, you've met our family, Aimee, but, we're kind of an irreverent family,
Yeah,
and we
kind of.
do a lot of joking and mocking, and so that was happening in the text thread, and the editor kept saying, "I understand this is because you're, in denial and dealing with how traumatic the experience is," and I was like, "No, that's just the way we are," but she, I think rightfully said, we are accelerating as we move towards your mother's death, and we want that to feel like you're on a sort of downhill acceleration. And I agreed with her. I thought that was a really helpful read. So we took out a lot of the family stuff, but I'll probably put it back in for the longer thing.
That's what a gift. And you said you're working on a longer piece about the family. Are you taking this and doing something larger with it or
I
something
mean, I'm
different?
working on a book based on so you should imagine the essay as kind of the opening newsreel. If you've seen Citizen Kane, you might remember the opening newsreel tells you the whole
Mm.
story, and then you go back and get the full story. So I'm imagining the opening essay sort of like that, and then we'll pull down parts of the essay and open them up. And um but it's written not just in primary documents, so it's a much more traditional reflective voice, although I have found that the tenses are kind of all over the place, verb tenses in terms of past and present, as if it's still alive for me, go figure. And so there isn't a lot of, "Now I understand that," which there sometimes is in memoir, right? So the gap between the past self and the present self is maybe not so overtly drawn. Um
Mm.
but I'm, I don't know. I have whatever, 150 pages of that or something. So that's the
Yeah.
project. But we'll see.
These projects are so the form of them goes all over the place. Have you read Gish Jen's latest Bad Bad Girl?
I haven't read it yet. It's on the shelf.
It's kind of a wild it's funny because she does something that I was thinking about doing with my story with my father, which is she takes, all of this nonfiction and then kind of makes up her mother's voice and goes into these long sort of fictional asides with the ghost, talking with the ghost, and then comes back. And so it is this fusion of fiction and nonfiction that I gave up on personally, but I think it's because my father's voice wasn't strong enough in my head. Her mother's voice is so strong
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it's a battle of titans on the page. But
Well, I
it's
mean,
interesting.
most nonfiction, memoir nonfiction is a fusion of memory and imagination, right? And
100%.
so,
Yeah.
I mean, and like the queen of that in some ways is Joanne Beard. I mean, her
Yeah.
most recent collection, Festival Days, and her first collection, Boys of My Youth, taught me so much about what kind of genre bending flexibility was possible and what kinds of effects you could get from seemingly meandering associative thinking that isn't, of course, it's so structured, but it seems effortless.
Yeah.
And, I aspire to that, but not going to
Yeah.
get there because she already exists.
Well, we'll try to do our own versions as we
Exactly.
can.
Exactly.
This is a great you alluded to sharing work with Jim, and one of my final questions was, like, how do you survive in a two-writer household? We all know the stories of, authors that fantastically break up when they're supposed to be these, great romances, and then they just explode. Like, how do
Right.
you keep a marriage together with, two high-octane writers?
Um, I mean, I think both Jim and I feel, again, it goes back to what we were saying about writing conferences. It is a solitary pursuit. And to have a partner, a life partner who absolutely believes in the value of going off and locking yourself into a room and sitting at a desk for many hours a day is really extraordinarily, helpful, right? And priceless, really. Um, we we are each other's first readers, but I would say that we read differently at different stages. So when we're, giving each other pages that are just off the printer of something that is not complete yet, the other is responding in a very different way. But eventually, we will respond with a pencil or a pen. I mean, we line edit each other. I think we both trust that we are going to get honest and rigorous responses, so that we absolutely trust that when the other says it's working, it's really working. You know,
Mm.
in the early going, it feels so lucky to have somebody who knows your artistic and aesthetic ticks. So it's like, oh, you always do this when you're stuck,
Mhm.
or there you go again, bringing in a dog,
Yeah,
Um,
right.
and so, and we can say that in a way that isn't, that is encouraging and inspiring and not deadening or paralyzing, right?
And you don't feel competitive with each other?
I really don't. I know writers who see the writing world as a zero-sum game, but and I'm not saying this to make myself sound holier than thou. I am just so glad when a writer I admire gets some attention. I mean, that's good for all of us, right? Letters are dying. And so I'm like, hey, if there's a George Saunders in the world who's a blockbuster bestseller for a close reading of Russian short stories, I'm going to go, yes, right? So I don't see that, say, Jim's success or attention takes away from mine. I just don't. I think it adds to it. I celebrate it. I really do.
That's, fantastic, and more power to you.
I mean, not always, but no.
Yeah, of course. Well, I this has been really a wonderful hour, Karen. Thank you so, so much for joining us. We'll have the video. It'll be up on MFA Lore tomorrow, along with the takeaways and the transcript and
Well,
all
thank
that
you
good
so much
stuff.
for having me, Amy. It was a lovely conversation. It's
Yeah, it
always
was
lovely to
really,
chat with you about books.
really, really great fun. I can't wait to see you will doubtless finish your family memoir
Oh,
way before I do mine
I don't
because
know. I don't know. I'm just happy to be working on it.
yeah, that's sort of how I feel too. Just as long as I've got something to go back to decade after decade, it's
Exactly.
fine.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. And
Thank
thank
you.
you, everybody who joined us. And until next time, thanks. Bye.
Bye.